That Friday night was the most profound and indelible experience of my life. The place was exceptionally tranquil, instilling in me an uncommon sensation of serenity. I was fatigued following a prolonged week and merely desired to rest as I reclined. I believed nothing could disrupt the tranquility of the night. I had been a single mother for 8 years following my divorce, and my ex-husband and I maintained an amicable relationship. We simply grew apart. Parenting my son Jimmy independently was the most fulfilling and demanding endeavor I have ever undertaken. He embodied all qualities I cherished: intelligent, humorous, and compassionate, yet it was challenging to fulfill the roles of both mother and father that evening. Was so tired that I barely had the energy to put on my pajamas before falling into bed. The house was silent. Jimmy had gone to bed hours earlier after playing video games and doing his homework. Finally, I had a moment to myself in my room. The moon shone through the thin curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls. I snuggled under the blanket, enjoying the warmth and letting my mind wander. Life had been calm lately, which was a nice change after a difficult year. Jimmy and I had been through a lot together since his father left, but we had built a wonderful life together even though Jimmy was almost 20. Now we were still very close. He was always caring and thoughtful. Sometimes I worried that he took on too much responsibility for someone his age. I smiled as I thought about him. He was so kind, and I felt fortunate to have him in my life. However, tonight, I was too worn out to think, feeling heavy and sleepy. Then, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I woke up a little thinking it was part of a dream, but the knock came again gently, and I was fully awake. Mom. Jimmy's voice was quiet, but it was enough to wake me up. I blinked, trying to focus on the door. I could see Jimmy's outline in the dim light coming from the hallway. I sat up, trying to wake myself up completely. Jimmy, what's wrong? I inquired, my voice still drowsy. He hesitated before entering the room and gently closing the door behind him. He seems hesitant about entering. I was unable to sleep, he remarked, averting his gaze as he stood beside my bed. I felt apprehensive because it was evident that something had troubled him since the divorce. Jimmy occasionally experienced difficulties with sleep, however, he hardly discussed it. He understood that his father's departure affected him more than he revealed, and this evening, I could perceive the sorrow in his eyes. Approach here, I said, gesturing to the vacant area beside me on the bed. You may spend the night with me if you wish. He paused briefly before approaching and reclining beside me. He lay on his side, facing me, and I could discern his fatigue in the subdued light. He also appeared vulnerable, a rarity for him. Would you like to discuss it? I inquired gently as Jimmy shook his head, his dark hair falling over his eyes. No, I merely wished to be near you. My heart warmed. It had been some time since Jimmy desired closeness like this, reminiscent of his youth. I reached out and brushed his hair from his forehead, smiling at him. That's all right, I whispered, placing my hand on his shoulder. You may stay as long as you need. He smiled back, yet I could discern something troubling him, an issue he was reluctant to discuss. Rather than probing, I reclined, pulled the blanket over us, and allowed the tranquility to envelope us as we lay there, savoring the serenity. Jimmy's breathing gradually slowed, leading me to believe he had fallen asleep. However, he then spoke again, so softly I could barely hear him. Mom, do you ever miss him? The question astonished me, although I recognized he was referring to his father. It was a query I had evaded for years. I was uncertain how to respond. We had a strained relationship, Jimmy, you are aware of that. He nodded, yet I sensed his desire for further clarification. Do you ever contemplate whether things could have been different? He inquired. I sighed, reflecting on past regrets. Perhaps, but we cannot alter what transpired, we must progress. Jimmy gazed downward, fiddling with the edge of the blanket. I suppose I just wonder if I could have acted differently, if I had been better. His words pierced my heart. I got up and faced Jimmy. No, this was not your fault, you did nothing wrong, I asserted earnestly. He averted his gaze, his voice barely audible. Sometimes it feels as if, had I been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left. Tears welled in my eyes as I embraced him tightly. He hesitated momentarily but then reciprocated, burying his face in my shoulder. "Jimmy, listen to me," I said, my voice trembling. "Your father made his own choices, had nothing to do with you, it was his decision, and it was never your responsibility. You've always been more than enough for me." "Jimmy," I whispered, my voice filled with love and reassurance, "you're everything to me." He nodded against my shoulder, but I could still sense the tension within him, the weight of years of unspoken pain and guilt. We held each other closely, the silence between us as a comfort balm. Gradually his body relaxed, his breathing deepening as he drifted off to sleep, but as he slumbered peacefully beside me, my mind raced, thoughts and memories swirling in the darkness. We had both endured so much, and yet, amidst the quiet comfort of that shared embrace, an unexpected feeling stirred within me, a sensation I couldn't quite name. It was a warmth that spread through my chest, a connection that felt deeper and more intimate than the usual bond between a mother and her son. I tried to dismiss it, to focus on the rhythm of his breathing. But the feeling persisted. A persistent whisper that refused to be ignored. Morning arrived too soon. The soft light of dawn painted the room in gentle hues. Jimmy slept soundly beside me, his face peaceful and relaxing, the tension of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with love and pride, yet that unfamiliar feeling lingered, a persistent undercurrent beneath the surface of my maternal affection. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb him, and made my way downstairs to prepare breakfast. The familiar routine of cooking offered a sense of normality, but my thoughts kept returning to our late-night conversation. Jimmy had always been sensitive, but I hadn't realized the extent to which he had internalized his father's absence. The guilt he carried weighed heavily on my heart, a burden I wish I could alleviate, but it wasn't just the tension that lingered in my mind was the way he had looked at me, the vulnerability in his eyes, the unspoken longing for something more, and if I was honest with myself, the warmth I had felt while holding him had stirred something deep within me. A connection that transcended the boundaries of our familial roles. I tried to push the thought away, reminding myself that he was my son. But the feeling persisted, as persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. Soon Jimmy emerged from his slumber. His tousled hair framed his lanky figure, still exhibiting the remnants of adolescence, yet his eyes reflected a newfound maturity, hinting at the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a warm smile, attempting to conceal the lingering emotions from the previous night. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I remarked, placing a plate of pancakes before him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into his chair and beginning his breakfast. We dined in comfortable silence, the morning light casting a warm glow over the kitchen. I sensed his gaze occasionally lingering on me, but I refrained from addressing the events of the prior night. He appeared more at ease, more like himself, and I did not wish to disrupt the fragile peace we had established. Finally, Jimmy broke the silence, his voice imbued with gratitude. "Thanks for last night, Mom." His vulnerability unexpectedly surprised me. "There is no need for you to express thank you for last night, Mother. Consistently support you regardless of the circumstances. There is no need to express gratitude, Jimmy." His gaze remained fixed on me, an unspoken question lingering in the air. I was uncertain how to react or how to manage the nuanced change in our relationship. His eyes exhibited a newfound focus. Longing for a connection that surpassed the conventional boundaries of mother and son, I recognized a part of myself I had previously been reluctant to acknowledge. After breakfast, he lingered at the counter, his fingers tracing patterns on the surface. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" he asked quietly, his voice laden with unexpressed emotions. I sighed, feeling the weight of past regrets settle upon me. "Maybe," I replied softly, "but we cannot alter what transpired. All we can do is strive to move forward." Jimmy nodded, his gaze fixed on his restless fingers. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something better, you know?" His voice was barely a whisper, tinged with guilt and self-reproach, and his words pierced my heart. I instinctively reached out to him, placing a hand on his shoulder and drawing him into a gentle embrace. "Jimmy, you did nothing wrong, none of this was your fault." I reassured him, my voice laden with emotion. He averted his gaze, his speech scarcely discernible. "At times, it seems that had I been more adequate, perhaps Father would not have departed," as tears filled my eyes while I embraced him closely. Residential resisted for a moment, then surrendered to the embrace, burying his face in my shoulder. "Jimmy, listen to me," I said in my voice unwaveringly. "Your father's choices were his own. You are, and always have been, more than enough. His leaving had nothing to do with you." He nodded slowly, his body relaxing against mine, the tension in his shoulders gradually easing as he settled into the embrace. I felt that unfamiliar warmth rise within me again, a mix of relief, affection, and an undeniable sense of connection. The bond between us, once defined by the roles of mother and son, seemed to be shifting, evolving into something new, something neither of us fully understood but both instinctively felt. For now, I held him close, letting the moment linger without questions or explanations. I wasn't sure where this newfound intimacy would lead us, but I knew that life as we had known it was changing, and this was just the beginning. As I lay there in the darkness, enveloped in the warmth of my son's embrace, a profound realization washed over me. The delicate balance of our relationship was shifting, teetering on the precipice of something new and uncharted. A tremor of apprehension coursed through me, a whisper of uncertainty about what this transformation might mean for us. Yet, amidst the apprehension, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation, a recognition that this was merely the beginning of a journey into the unknown. Dawn arrived with a gentle insistence on the soft tendrils of sunlight weaving their way through the curtains, rousing me from slumber beside me. Jimmy slept peacefully, his face serene and relaxed, the burdens of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I watched him for a moment. My heart was swelling with familiar maternal love, yet beneath that well-known affection, a different current stirred, a sensation I couldn't quite define. It was the same unfamiliar feeling that had danced at the edges of my awareness the previous night, a sensation both intrigued and unsettled me. I slipped out of bed, taking care not to disturb his slumber, and made my way downstairs to the familiar routine of breakfast preparation. I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. My thoughts drifted back to our late-night conversation. Jimmy had always been a sensitive soul, but I hadn't grasped the depth of his internal struggle, the way he had carried the weight of his father's absence. The guilt he harbored about a secret he had kept hidden for far too long now weighed heavily on my heart, but there was more to it than that. There was a shift in his demeanor, in the way he had sought solace in my arms, a yearning for a closeness that transcended the traditional boundaries of mother and son. And if I was honest with myself, I had felt it too, a warmth that spread through me when I held him, a comfort that went beyond maternal. Instinctively, I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. "He's just a boy," I reminded myself, "of your son." But the feeling lingered, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. Jimmy finally emerged from his sleep, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his hair tousled, a picture of youthful innocence, yet there was a newfound maturity in his gaze, a hint of the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a warm smile, attempting to mask the lingering emotions from the night before. "The sleepyhead," I chirped, placing a plate of golden pancakes before him. He mumbled, settling into his chair and eagerly devouring his breakfast. We ate in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight bathing the kitchen in a warm glow. I could feel his eyes on me occasionally, but I remained silent. Prepared to explore the intricacies of the prior evening's revelations, he appeared more relaxed. He looked more like himself, and I wanted to maintain the delicate tranquility we had created. Ultimately, he disrupted the silence, his voice imbued with appreciation. "Thanks for last night, Mom." His vulnerability took me by surprise. "You never need to express gratitude to me, Jimmy." "Reese, thank you for last night, Mother." His vulnerability astonished me. Gaze lingered, a silent question lingering in his eyes, a mirror of the unspoken emotions I had been grappling with. His eyes held a depth and intensity that transcended the familiar comfort of our mother-son bond. The day unfolded uneventfully. Jimmy retreated to his room, immersed in homework and video games while I busied myself with household chores. Yet the atmosphere between us had subtly shifted. It was an intangible change, a quiet tension into an unspoken acknowledgement of the deeper connection that had emerged as the day transitioned into evening. My thoughts returned to Jimmy's transformation from boy to young man and the closeness we had shared the night before. The more I pondered, the more I realized that my feelings for him had evolved, transcending the boundaries of maternal love. That evening after dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The room was dimly lit, the flickering images on the screen casting dancing shadows across the walls. We were mostly silent, content in each other's presence, but as the movie progressed, I became acutely aware of his proximity, The way his arm brushed against mine with each subtle shift, my heart quickened, and I tried to focus on the film, but the tension between us was palpable. A silent symphony of unspoken emotions. Halfway through the movie, Jimmy shifted closer, his arm pressing against mine. This time he didn't move away. The warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness through me. Glanced at him, and our eyes met. His gaze filled with a newfound intensity. In a moment of introspection on the emotions I had been subconsciously repressing during the day, I extended my hand and grasped his, our fingers interlacing. He did not withdraw but rather gently squeezed my hand with his thumb, tracing a deliberate circle on my skin. The uncomplicated act elicited a flutter in my heart, a feeling both recognizable and exhilarating. We remained in that position for some time. In the subdued illumination, it served as a quiet monument to the evolving dynamics of our relationship, marking a pivotal moment. A moment of unarticulated comprehension that transcended it. Constituted a pivotal moment. Emerged, I was uncertain of the future, yet aware that transformations were occurring. Dan had evolved from merely being my son to someone I cherished in a manner that eluded definition. The film concluded, yet we remained on the couch, the credits rolling unnoticed. I rested my head against his shoulder, perceiving the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. This minor gesture felt deeply intimate, a silent recognition of the burgeoning connection between us. "Mom," Jimmy whispered, his voice barely audible, "yeah, I'm really glad you're here." His words, though simple, resonated profoundly with the sentiments in my own heart. I was glad he was here too, glad for this unexpected closeness, this newfound intimacy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I lay there in the darkness, enveloped in the warmth of my son's embrace, a profound realization washed over me. The delicate balance of our relationship was shifting, teetering on the precipice of something new and uncharted. A tremor of apprehension coursed through me, a whisper of uncertainty about what this transformation might mean for us. Yet amidst the apprehension there was an undeniable sense of anticipation, a recognition that this was merely the beginning of a journey into the unknown. Dawn arrived with a gentle insistence, the soft tendrils of sunlight weaving their way through the curtains. Rousing me from slumbering beside me, Jimmy slept peacefully, his face serene and relaxed, the burdens of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal love, yet, beneath that well-known affection, a different current-stirred sensation. I couldn't quite define it as the same unfamiliar feeling that had danced at the edges of my awareness the night before, a sensation that both intrigued and unsettled me. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb his sleep, and made my way downstairs to the familiar routine of breakfast preparation. As I stood at the stove flipping pancakes with practice ease, my thoughts drifted back to our late-night conversation. Jimmy had always been a sensitive soul, but I hadn't grasped the depth of his internal struggle, the way he had carried the weight of his father's absence. The guilt he harbored, a secret he had kept hidden for far too long, now weighed heavily on my heart. But there was more to it than that. His manner shifted as he sought solace in my embrace, expressing a need for intimacy that surpassed conventional mother-son boundaries, and if I were truthful, I had experienced it as well. The sensation that enveloped me upon holding him transcended mere maternal instinct. Instinctively, I dismissed the thought, concentrating on the immediate task. He was merely a boy, I reminded myself, your son, yet the feeling persisted, a relentless whisper that refused to be quelled. Jimmy eventually stirred from his slumber, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His hair was disheveled, embodying youthful innocence, yet there was an emerging maturity in his gaze, a glimpse of the man he was destined to become. I greeted him with a warm smile, attempting to conceal the residual emotions from the previous night. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I chirped, placing a plate of golden pancakes before him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into his chair and eagerly consuming his breakfast. We dined in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight enveloping the kitchen in a warm glow. I sensed his occasional glances towards me, but I remained silent. Prepared to explore the intricacies of the prior evening's revelations, he appeared more relaxed and authentic, and I was reluctant to disturb the delicate tranquility we had established. Ultimately, he disrupted the silence, his voice imbued with appreciation. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that." His vulnerability surprised me. "There is no need for you to express gratitude, Jimmy. I reassured him I'll always be there for you, no matter. He nodded, but his gaze lingered, a silent question lingering in his eyes, a mirror of the unspoken emotions I had been grappling with. His eyes held a depth and intensity that transcended the familiar comfort of our mother's son bond. Watched the day unfold uneventfully, and Jimmy retreated to his room immersed in homework and video games while I busied myself with household chores. Yet the atmosphere between us had subtly shifted. It was an intangible change, a quiet tension into an unspoken acknowledgement of the deeper connection that had emerged as the day transitioned into evening. My thoughts returned to Jimmy, to his transformation from boy to young man, to the closeness we had shared the night before. The more I pondered, the more I realized that my feelings for him had evolved, transcending the boundaries of maternal love. That evening after dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The room was dimly lit, the flickering images on the screen casting dancing shadows across the walls. We were mostly silent, content in each other's presence, but as the movie progressed, became acutely aware of his proximity, the way his arm brushed against mine. With each subtle shift my heart quickened, and I tried to focus on the film, but the tension between us was palpable, a silent symphony of unspoken emotions. Halfway through the movie, Jimmy shifted closer, his arm pressing against mine. This time he didn't move away. The warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness through me. GL looked at him, and our eyes met. His stare was imbued with a sudden intensity, reflecting the emotions I had been unconsciously suppressing all day. I extended my hand, and our fingers interlaced. He did not resist, instead softly squeezing my hand while his thumb traced a gentle circle on my skin. The modest act elicited a tremor in my heart, a feeling that was both recognizable and thrillingly novel. We remained in that position for some time, hands intertwined in the subdued illumination, a quiet reflection of the evolving nature of our relationship. It marked a pivotal moment. A moment of unarticulated understanding transcended our familial roles. Although uncertain about the future, I recognized that circumstances were evolving. Jimmy was no longer merely my son, but rather someone I cherished in an indefinable manner. As the film concluded and the credits rolled, we remained seated on the couch. Unnoticed, I rested my head on his shoulder, attuning to the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. This seemingly trivial gesture felt deeply intimate, a silent acknowledgement of the burgeoning connection between us. "Mom," Jimmy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yeah, I'm really glad you're here." His simple yet profound words resonated with the sentiments in my own heart. I was pleased by his presence, appreciative of this unforeseen proximity, this newly discovered intimacy that was simultaneously daunting and invigorating, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I felt genuinely alive. There existed no misunderstanding or guilt, only the unequivocal truth of our love, a love forged through years of mutual trust and understanding that transcended familial bonds. It was a love as instinctive as respiration and as certain as the dawn. We reclined in the aftermath of our mutual ardor, the silence interrupted solely by the gentle cadence of our breathing. Jimmy ultimately withdrew his gaze, examining mine with a kindness that softened my heart. "Are we in a satisfactory state?" he asked, his voice a gentle caress in the darkness. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, my heart overflowing with emotions that defied. "Yeah," I whispered, my voice thick with unspoken truths. "We are okay." Later that night, after the remnants of dinner were cleared away and the house settled into a peaceful quietude, Jimmy and I found ourselves on the back porch, enveloped by the tranquility of the night was crisp and cool, the stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across the vast canvas of the sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of release and lifting of the weight that had been pressing down on me. We didn't speak much, but words were unnecessary. Simply being near him and sharing the quiet beauty of the night was enough. There was no urgency, no pressure, just comfortable silence that spoke volumes. Whatever this was between us was unfolding organically, and I was content to let it blossom at its own pace. He reached for my hand, his touch sending a warmth that spread through me like wildfire. I smiled, squeezing his hand gently, and we sat there, fingers intertwined, bathed in the soft glow of the starlight. Was a love that defied definition, a connection that transcended the boundaries of our familial roles. And in that moment, under the vast expanse of the night sky, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. As the days transitioned into weeks, the intimacy between us deepened, weaving its way into the fabric of our daily lives. We didn't need to label it to define it. It simply was in the way our eyes met and the lingering touches in the quiet moments. We shared, creating a world that belonged only to us. With each passing day, the connection between us grew stronger and more tangible. The conflict I had initially felt dissolved, replaced by a sense of rightness, a feeling that this was where I was meant to be. Jimmy was no longer just my son, he was now my partner. My confidant and lover. Our friendship has evolved into a lovely connection that satisfies an unrecognized need. It was not until a rainy afternoon in late October that the complete awareness of our love enveloped me. The sky was a canvas of stormy grays, the rain drumming a steady rhythm against the windows. Jimmy and I were curled up on the couch in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth casting a warm glow over the room. We were wrapped in a blanket, the warmth of the fire and the intimacy of our closeness creating a haven from the storm outside. Jimmy was leaning against me, his head resting on my shoulder, and I absently ran my fingers through his hair, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment. The rain windows blurred the outside world, creating a sense of seclusion, of being in our own little universe. I could feel his breathing slow and steady, and I knew without a word spoken that he was feeling the same shift in our connection, the same undeniable pull towards something more profound. He lifted his head and his eyes met mine, and in that moment, the truth of our love resonated between us. It wasn't just love, it was a bond that transcended the traditional roles we had played, a connection that had evolved into something deeper, something undeniable. Mom, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue, knowing that whatever he was about to say would change everything. I love you, he confessed, his hand reaching out to take mine, not just because you're my mom, but because of who you are. Everything about you, and I don't know if that's okay or if it's wrong, but I can't help it. His words washed over me like a warm wave, filling the room with a love that made my heart ache in the most beautiful way. I had sensed his feelings, but hearing him voice them, acknowledging the depth of his emotions, made it all the more real. I squeezed his hand, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my fingertips. Jimmy, I whispered, my voice trembling slightly, I reciprocate your affection. I have always loved you, but this situation is distinct. He nodded, his eyes seeking reassurance in mine for an answer to the unvoiced query that lingered between us. I am uncertain of the meaning of this. It persists, however. I am aware that my sentiments align similarly, and it does not seem erroneous, rather, it feels appropriate. A gentle smile graced his lips, and my heart surged with an unprecedented thrill. He muttered, I am pleased you feel that way, as I am uncertain of my actions if you did not. I extended my hand, gently stroking his cheek and sensing the warmth of his skin against my fingertips. We will resolve this issue, he reassured him. Together, we sat in silence for a moment, our gazes locked. The only sounds were the gentle patter of rain and the crackling of the fire. Words were unnecessary, as we had already conveyed everything essential. We both understood our feelings, and we recognized their authenticity. Slowly, Jimmy leaned in, his eyes never leaving mine, and gently, albeit hesitantly, he kissed me. It was a soft, tender kiss imbued with all the love and longing we had suppressed for so long. There was no urgency, no haste, merely a pure expression of our profound connection. His eyes brimmed with emotion as he withdrew, signifying that we had crossed a threshold, a point beyond which we could return. Yet, instead of fear, I felt a sense of tranquility and conviction that this was our destined place. He drew me closer, his arms enveloping me. And we held each other as the rain continued to fall, the fire casting a warm glow over our embrace. In that moment, I recognized that whatever challenges awaited us, we would confront them together. The remainder of the evening was a haze of tender touches, hushed conversations, and soft kisses. We refrained from discussing the future or the ramifications of our newfound affection. Our shared intimacy defined the present moment, while the rain continued its gentle serenade. I was astonished by the rapid transformation of our relationship. Jimmy had matured from a boy into a man, and consequently, our connection had evolved into something unforeseen, something exquisite, something that suited us perfectly. That night, Jimmy entered my room once more, but this time without hesitation. He joined me in bed, his arms enveloping me closely. It was not the comforting embrace of a mother and son, but rather the embrace of lovers, two souls intertwined. I rested my head on his chest, attuned to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a symphony of love and contentment, which instilled in me a profound sense of peace. I had not experienced a sense of fullness in years, an absence I had not realized I was missing, regardless of what this was or what it had evolved into. I was prepared for it. Jimmy and I had always shared a tight bond, but now we had evolved into something more profound. We were partners and lovers, two souls united by a love that surpassed conventional limits. As I succumbed to sleep, a smile graced my lips. It was chaotic, I was aware, yet it felt exhilarating,